The saying is, water is life. We're waterborne people. We depend on it.
This fishing spot is ancient. The Mohawk, the Kanien'kehá:ka, were fishing here thousands of years before the first European settlers arrived. This is Akwesasne, where the Mohawk have fished since long before this border cut their nation in half.
Fishing in this community is important. I know for our grandparents, it was a way of life. I believe in having those traditions passed down so they're never forgotten.
That one's huge!
Seeing those little boys and girls smiling and catching fish and enjoying themselves,
Yay!
That's the best. Yeah.
If you head upriver, just a couple of miles from this spot, you'll find two abandoned industrial sites. This is the spot where poisonous chemicals made their way into the river, into the fish, and into the Mohawk people. 40 years later, they're still carrying that poison, and chances are, you are too.
People used to live on the islands themselves, totally self-sufficient. My grandfather used to live on St. Regis Island. He's the one that introduced me to fishing. And we would row across the river. The shorelines were covered with weed beds. And it was a task to get our rowboat through the weed beds. We'd catch perch, sunfish, rock bass. He showed me how to clean fish, explained to me what it was all about. And my grandmother used to take me out to the berry gardens, and we'd pick raspberries and strawberries, blueberries out there. We had potatoes, vegetables. My grandfather had a good herd of cows. Just about everything we needed was out there. I remember that.
In the 1950s, the US and Canadian governments started a massive project to connect the Great Lakes with the Atlantic Ocean by widening and deepening the St. Lawrence River.
The seaway changed the geography of Akwesasne.
All the trees on the affected area must be cut down.
There was an apple orchard there, big apple orchard. The old man John owned that. And they said they were going to build a bridge across. They hadn't even consulted him until the equipment came up.
The seaway's locks and dams allowed giant container ships like these to navigate to the Great Lakes. And the dams supplied electricity, which the state of New York promised to sell to companies for cheap.
Every cent of expenditures will be recovered through toll charges and revenue from the sale of power. In the long run, it will cost the people of two nations nothing.
The press coverage focused exclusively on the benefits for Canadians and Americans, but there was a third nation whose people were affected.
A lot of our older people couldn't speak English. They couldn't understand why, how this could happen. How could a people do this? How could engineers do this? When the seaway went through, they weren't informed. They weren't asked what they thought about this.
Power to run the machines, the motors, to light the signs, the homes. Supply energy for the 1,001 needs of an expanding economy.
There were 9 islands that were flooded. There used to be a bay inlet. It was a swampy area. They filled that in. They said, oh, we'll do you a favor. Well, what about the muskrats? What about the beaver? They're gone. They're gone now.
Thus man is conquering another of nature's challenges, moving the Atlantic Ocean to the entire mid-continent empire.
When the frogs start to come out and they start to make noise, that for me indicates that the water and the ground temperature is right to do the spearfishing. This is it. This is the magic spot. So much life happens here. When you enter the water, it's not really good to walk where the fish are doing their thing. You know? That's their spawning bed. That's where they want to lay their eggs. So it's pretty precious space there. You got to be gentle and you got to be selective. Just recognizing, you know, that it's a gift. You should just respect it, you know. And just having that gratefulness that we're still able to do it, you know. That's what I always get to them. Like, we're so lucky. We're really, really lucky to have this. This is what I know. I'm the oldest son, so I have little brothers, and I teach them this stuff.
The Mohawk creation story says, at the beginning of time, the whole world was covered in water, and there was no land. That's when Sky Woman falls from the sky. She falls to the earth with a child in her belly. The ducks and the loons and the geese decided that they would try to help her from falling straight into the waters. In the end, it was the giant turtle who said that he could put the soil on his back, she could land on his back. And as she danced in the circle, as she shuffled her feet on the dirt, it expanded and expanded.
Our people give thanks to the water. They see it as an essential part of who we are.
New York's plan to lure industry upstate with cheap electricity, it worked. Two major corporations, General Motors and Reynolds Metal, built factories in the mostly white town of Massena, right next to Akwesasne. According to the local newspaper, Massena's politicians and business leaders reacted with joy. But for the Mohawk of Akwesasne, the news meant something else entirely. Soon after the new factories opened in the late 50s, Mohawk farmers on Cornwall Island started to notice their calves weren't growing as well. Then the cattle started mysteriously dying off. Later, it turned out that 400 pounds of fluoride ash was spewing out of the new Reynolds plant every hour. Veterinarians discovered it had poisoned the grass and eroded the cows' teeth, making it too painful for them to eat or drink. They were starving.
If you look across the history of settler colonialism, in areas where Indigenous people remained and still lived, corporations working under the laws of the United States were able to dump the most dangerous chemicals and pollutants there.
While I was in early practice doing home births here, there was a cluster of babies born. One baby born with an omphalocele, which is where the intestines grow outside the belly. Another was a baby born with no intestines at all, and they had to let that baby die. As an anecdote, it still gives you a sense of where's this heading.
That is polychlorinated biphenyls, which are used in a wide variety of manufactured products.
PCBs started showing up in American news stories in the late 1960s, when they were discovered in salmon and poultry. At the time, there was just one manufacturer of PCBs in the US, the Monsanto Company of St. Louis. They marketed the chemical under the name Aerochlor and sold it to other companies, who then used it to make products like shower curtains, paint, and electrical equipment, including the electrical equipment in those plants, the ones GM and Reynolds had built right next to Akwesasne. In 1971, a Monsanto representative told the New York Times that the company was studying the chemical's effects on rats and dogs. So far, they said, no ill effects had yet been detected. But Monsanto's internal documents from that time tell a different story. They knew that PCBs cause liver damage in rats. They knew that PCB exposure had sent workers to the hospital with symptoms of hepatitis. And in 1970, one of Monsanto's own studies on PCBs in fish showed that doses of PCB, which were believed to be okay, produced 100% kill. All the fish died.
You know, eating a certain food isn't just putting the stuff in your mouth. It's what goes on all around that moment of consumption.
My mom would tell me stories about how my father and his family would have these like fish skinning competitions, and it makes me so happy to think about how that was in itself like a way that we created community and family for each other and supported each other.
With really good friends or really good family members, we've known them for a long time, we trust them, we know that they respect our independence and our consent. In Indigenous, ways of understanding the world, we can use that way of thinking about relationships as a model. What would it mean to have relationships of trust with fish, relationships of reciprocity with a forest, for consent with a plant? Our community is not just the humans, but all of our interdependent relationships.
When we teach our children about giving thanks, that's what we're trying to do, is to get them to see that they're not just fish, but they're the fish. And these fish help us to maintain our life.
In 1981, 2 pits full of PCB sludge were discovered behind the GM factory near Akwesasne, prompting scientists to start testing local wildlife. At the time, chickens with PCB concentrations of more than 5 parts per million couldn't be sold in supermarkets. But most of the fish in Akwesasne had levels much higher. 30 parts per million is considered toxic waste. Researchers tested one snapping turtle with a PCB concentration of 835 parts per million. It turned out, both GM and Reynolds had been dumping PCB waste into the St. Lawrence River for decades.
We were just straight up told to not eat fish, that we would die.
They were telling us that the tomatoes that were coming out of the garden shouldn't be eaten by children, so a lot of people just stopped farming altogether.
I remember talking to an older lady from the island here, and she actually burst into tears. And she said, when I go down to the shoreline to look for sweet flag, it's not there. I look for my sweetgrass, it's not there. What have they done to this place?
The plants, the animals, the ecosystems are thought of as part of the bonds, part of the friendships. And imagine if somebody were to take something that was really important to a friendship, a family relationship that you have, and just pollute it and just damage or destroy it. That hits us hard, right? That's devastating. But see, this is what Native people have been through with colonialism, a systematic, comprehensive destruction of all of those touchstones in our society, those environments that formed the contexts through which our best relationships unfolded.
We lost pieces of our language, of our value system with the river because of our disconnect, because of these fish advisories. And so right now I can't recommend people to consume fish because that's our policy. But personally, I'm like, we have to consume fish so we know their names and so we reconnect with them.
There was an existing relationship that they had with everything that the water system provided. It was part of their life. And it was taken away. It changed. All of a sudden, it wasn't there.
In the decades since PCBs were discovered, scientists documented the scope of the PCB problem outside of Akwesasne. People all over North America were told not to eat the fish from the rivers, streams, and lakes where they lived. Scientists also learned that PCBs can move from the soil into the air through a process called volatilization, which means that even if you don't live near a PCB dump, you can still be exposed through the air that you breathe. In 2013, the UN's International Agency for Research in Cancer stated officially, PCBs are carcinogenic to humans, and they are probably in the body of every human on Earth.
I can't do too much given our current reality, but I can go out there in the morning and sing Ahunte, ahunte sa koyatizo, nyawa, nyawa sa koyatizo. To be grateful.
You come from the ground up, right, and you give thanks to everything. Agwego aska, adida wakwe nuni ne ngwat nigula, tano de tino alados ne kajo su. The roots, the trees, the plants, or the skies, the winds, the stars. Ngwa Nikula, one mind.
Ganja, ta ganjange, asa ni ganjange, kayeli ni ganjange, wis ni ganjange, wis ni ganjange.
A river has a right to community and to build community around itself. And I think a lot about how that's our responsibility as Ungwahua people to facilitate that.
There was a little boy ice fishing, and he was putting the fish in a big plastic bucket. And we saw him at the end of the day take his bucket and run home with it. And I wondered, what is his mother going to say when she sees all the fish her little son caught? She's going to be proud of him.
Lagini hayagene ajatanue, lagini adota igele, igele.